Good morning, everybody. So this is Coach Kurt with the Alpha Collie Fight Team, and broadcasting here through the Fight House Talks podcast. This morning, I am joined by Tela O'Donnell Bacher, and she's a phenomenal individual, phenomenal human being, a great inspiration for women's wrestling and just coaches in general. I hope you guys have an opportunity to catch this podcast. If you are catching it live, go ahead and throw in comments wherever you're from, share it, push all the buttons. I'm really awful about self promotion, but really uh, take the time to listen. What is really cool about the mission of this podcast is we're having candid conversations about life, violence, and martial arts. These podcasts are really, and especially with the way I present, are really talking about the mindset of a coach, the mindset of an instructor, the things that we deal with that often athletes don't think about until they themselves become coaches or they themselves become instructors. So the things to consider is dealing with the generation that came before us. We should always be striving to be better each generation. So why not help coach the coach? And so with that in mind, I'm gonna bring on my guest here, and yeah, here we go. Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, thank you
All
for
right.
having me.
Thank you, Taylor. And yeah, it's so for those who don't know us, Taylor is also lives here in Homer, Alaska, with me as well. We've interacted over the years, just over the time of just being here, and like in similar circles, because dealing with combat sports and sports wrestling, I mean, it overlaps. So like we have some common athletes that we have worked with over the years. So, but yeah, I want to shut up for a little bit and let Taylor tell us who Tela is.
Okay, thank you so much, Kurt. Again, it's just a really pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me on and talking with me this morning, because it's morning here in Alaska, kind of still. My name's Tela O'Donnell Bacher. Like Kurt said, I grew up here in Homer, Alaska, in the woods with my mom. She built a house out of logs. I just kind of grew up, single mom, only child in the woods, in the neighborhood out East End Road. And then in middle school, I just started getting into sports and thinking, oh, like I'm going to play these sports, but I didn't have any of the skills. Was bad at volleyball, bad at basketball, bad at soccer, but I really enjoyed that sports mentality of, like learning about the world through a team. In my 8th grade year, I was particularly bad at volleyball. It's like all balls. I had no skills. And so I thought, oh, I think I'm going to try wrestling. I had done Aikido for just like a few months when I was 12 years old. And I just really liked the idea of it. It just kind of fit. And so I had like that small introduction to like martial arts, to like a combat sport. And so wrestling seemed like a good option. So I talked to the coach. Coach Steve Wolf. I talked to the principal and they're like, yep, good to go. And so I went to join and then they're like, oh, wait, hold on. The school board, Cannon Peninsula School Board said that they don't allow girls to wrestle now. There had been another couple of girls that had wrestled, maybe one beat a coach's kid. And then they're like, no, this doesn't feel quite right. And so they said no. And I was like, dang, that's too bad. At that same time, I had a PE teacher, Deb Lowney. She's one of my favorite people. She's like, there's this law, it's called Title IX, and, they can't really take that opportunity away from you. If they give the opportunity to the boys, they have to also give that opportunity to the girls. So I wrote a letter to the school board saying, please let me wrestle. I just want to give it a try. And by the way, there's this law, it's called Title IX, and I don't think you have a choice. And so they allowed me to practice with the team. I just practiced. I wasn't allowed to compete. And I thought, good enough. And so I wrestled throughout high school, wrestled a little bit in college. And then when they opened up the Olympic Training Center for women, because they introduced women's wrestling into the 2004 Olympics, I moved out to Colorado Springs, trained there, made the first ever women's Olympic team in 2004, and competed in Athens, Greece, where I got like maybe 6th place or something. And then retired, finished college, had some kids, came back to Alaska. I coach. And then in 2016, I joined this organization called Wrestle Like a Girl. And And we've advocated for girls wrestling throughout the country. A few years later, we kind of have a side project here with a couple of female coaches here in the state called Alaska Girls Wrestle. And we work on just making a pipeline for girls to come into the sport, have a positive experience within the sport, and then utilize those skills in life. Because, I'm a big fan of sport, but I'm like a big fan of like, how can we use sport to make a difference in the world around us? And that's what I do.
Sweet. So let's back that up a little bit.
Yeah.
You're a pioneer. I mean, in the literal sense, because we live in Alaska, we live on the frontier. But you're a pioneer in sports, in women's sports. Let's take a moment and like revel in your glory there for a moment.
Thank you.
Because without you, I mean, let's look at the precedents. You set the groundwork for. Let's talk about some of our phenomenal female athletes that are coming out of Homer, Alaska. I mean, we got the whole Cook clan. I mean, I love that family. For those who don't know, the Cook clan are this wrestling family. They embody wrestling, and we both have had the pleasure to work with the Cook family for years, and they have some phenomenal wrestlers. I mean, Mackenzie, she is a powerhouse. And I remember little Saoirse. She's not so little anymore. She's awesome on the mat.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention you got Tristan, you got all of them. I mean, the Cook kids are phenomenal. But without you, who's to say they would have that opportunity? They could have gone to something else. I don't know if they would have, but I mean, without you setting the groundwork, that is incredible. So huzzah
Thank you
for
so
that.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to say, like, it wasn't like my journey. I mean, like, maybe I was the one that walked it, but other people put planks in front of me and moved some trees out of the way, allowing me to do that. It's always a group effort whenever, progress is made forward. But also, thank you for that. I also worked pretty hard.
Oh yeah, you did. You're the one on the mat. So so here's the other thing for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of athletes watch this podcast, but just for let's refresh that whole aspect of an athlete. Even an individual sports athlete, they are alone on the mat, in the ring, in the cage. Yes. However, getting to that point, there's so much of the ancillary support that is attached to them. I mean, just immediately out there, just on the outside of the mat, they have their coach who is with them no matter what. From the beginning to the end, celebration and tears, they're with them. And on top of all that, they have the family. The family's in the stands. The family's on the bench watching throughout practice. The family's cleaning whatever uniform they're using. They're there no matter what. Then they have their significant other. Then they have their teammates, which is huge because the fact is we talk about tribe often in sports, and specifically like when we talk about like combat sports attached to like military and everything else. But the fact is it's a group effort. It's a tribe, regardless if it's combat sports or if it's a social group. You still have that connection with a group of people that people just are chomping at the bit to be part of because there's an identity attached to it. And that identity can be very damaging, but in essence it's an identity built on love because we love the thing that we do. We love the people around us who do it with us, and they shower that love by being there in support. So again, with a coach, they love their athletes, and an athlete has a special relationship with them, and that is incredibly powerful. And it is, it's a beautiful thing for people who have never been a coach. It is a different level of being an athlete, and I always encourage people to give it a try because, for one, from a martial arts standpoint, is to really know a thing, you need to be able to teach a thing and teach it effectively. But not every athlete's a great coach, and for those who can become a great coach, they're a special type of person. But that starts with they got to be an athlete first. So, well done. So,
well, thank you,
Yeah.
and to all the other people. Yes.
So, do we want to talk about the road to the Olympics? Because you want to do it?
We can just do. Yeah. Let's talk about whatever you want to talk into. We can dig starting from the beginning if you want, or we can talk, whatever you think that people want to hear about.
Well, you did a great video and presentation through TEDx up in Anchorage, and for those who haven't watched it, it's on YouTube. I linked it in the group discussion page. I'll throw it on our Facebook channel. But the big thing about it was I rewatched it this morning, and I've watched it I remember watching it last year, and the things that really spoke out to me with that, as for one, as a coach and as a father, because my oldest child is a girl, and trying to figure out what she wants to do is something that's ever present in my mind. Obviously, what I wanted her to do is the things that she wants to do and what she loves and what she is encouraged to do. So, but keeping that mindset of like, hey, if she goes into sports, there is, especially if it's a male dominant sport like combat sports, there's things I have to consider. And as a father, I'm stuck with a very macho, ego-driven, protective mentality. But I have to think about, what is my daughter thinking? So and a big issue we run into with like martial arts, combat sports, and personal protection is this idea of women's self-defense, women's personal protection. And there is this issue about, and I've observed this and been participant of it, of like, you have a man telling a woman how to defend themselves. You have a man telling a woman what she needs to consider about protecting herself. You have a man telling a woman what are the things that really matter to her and her scope and her consideration when dealing with athletics, combat sports, and life in general. So I want to shut up and have you like, what are those things that my daughter might be thinking about when she's going into any sport?
I think this is a really cool question, and like, get me on track if I get off track.
Yeah.
So you're asking like from like kind of a female perspective, like what is it to be coming into these maybe combat sports as a female, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
From the female perspective, and I think that you really hit on a note there, like so much of the leadership in combat sports, wrestling, other sports has been male dominated, and it's a male dominated space, right? And it's shifting, which is so cool for many different reasons. But when there's that, when it's a system built for men rather than women, there's a couple of things that just once you start incorporating female leadership, you can kind of address naturally, right?
Yep.
So I think that thank you for letting me be here and speak about this topic, because coaching is coaching, right? You care about the athlete, you want them to progress within their sport and also be able to develop skills that they can use for the rest of their life. Yep. And when you go and do that in an intentional way, it's 100% important. Like it's going to land. And there's a couple things that there's some like girls, men, like, and women, like there's just some like different things, right? That I didn't even recognize were different about coaching girls and coaching boys until I was a coach, until I listened to other coaches, and until I kind of like reflect back. I'm like, oh yeah, that is me. So when girls join the sport of wrestling, a lot of times, and I'll just say wrestling because that's what I know, but I think it probably extends to many other combat sports and maybe other sports in general. You kind of sell it to them differently, right? If like the way we've always sold wrestling to boys is like, hey, come into the wrestling room. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. You'll be miserable, but you'll be like strong and you'll be able to defend yourself, and you'll be like, you'll be like
very ego. Yeah.
Right. Like we do kind of feed the ego a little bit.
Yep.
With the girls, like, I mean, girls don't necessarily honestly, a lot of people don't want to do something that's going to be the hardest thing that they've ever done in their life. I feel like that is like, it's just a hard sell. I mean, maybe you'll get a couple people, but like to like open it up to wider people, like, hey, like, you're going to develop through this so you can handle so much more. You're going to build, like for women, like the way for girls and women, bring them into the sport, like you're going to build connections that you will have for the rest of your life. And it's not like just only girls and women value that, but the salesmanship of the sport is a little bit different. You're going to build confidence in yourself that you just build from being in a combat sport. I think maybe I even said this in my TED talk, but it was just it really hit me, especially like with the combat sport aspect. I was in Pakistan, and we saw soccer, we saw badminton, we saw all these different sports.
Boxing.
We saw boxing. So like we went and saw all these different sports, but like walking into the boxing room, where these these girls, some of them without hijabs, some of them with sports hijabs, like there was something that was so familiar about that, even though I'm a terrible boxer. Look at this. This is terrible, right? I saw this this confidence and presence that like you could see just walking into the room. I didn't speak the same language. I didn't play the same sport, but that confidence that you get from knowing how to own your space, knowing where your body is, knowing what your capability is and what it's not, is incredible. And that translates through all combat sports. Sometimes girls coming into combat sports, I think culturally there's a lot of expectation and cultural experience where boys, will wrestle and they'll fight and they'll, be more physical and with another body than girls are sometimes. Again, like gross generalization, but that happens again and again. So it's not that girls aren't interested in that or they can't get there. It's just many girls, like before they come into a combat sport, have not really experienced that actual physical touch of being like, I'm going to move your body here. It feels like you're being mean or you're being bad. And so, as you're bringing girls into the sport, to build up to that rather than just like jump right in can help you keep a couple extra girls in the room who would be like, yeah, that doesn't feel I'm not comfortable, but they're just not there yet. Right. And so, kind of starting from here, and recognizing you can get here, you can get to that place, but don't start here because you'll start losing people. I think that some other things about, like as you think about your daughter going into sports, sport's not just sport, right? It's not just the performance and being successful at what you're doing there. It's the community. It's the I'm not a big outfit wearer, but for a lot of our girls on our wrestling, having those that camaraderie around what we are wearing to practice, how we present
the uniform.
Yeah. And getting your girls involved in developing that and that can make it really that can get people excited. I mean, think about when you get new running shoes, you're like, I'm gonna go run. I mean, I haven't run for 3 months, but I got these new shoes and I feel like I have all this energy. So there's value there. And I think that something that is also pretty relatable to everybody, but very important for women is that girls in the sport need to know that their coach cares about them as a human being first, right? That trust is so important to build with your female athletes. Whereas a lot of times your male athletes need to respect you and what you can do on the mat or what you can do in the ring or what you can do on the field. And once they respect you, they'll follow you. With girls and women, once they believe that you care about them, then they'll follow you, right? And so it's that, and they'll follow you and work hard for you as well as athletes. So similar, not necessarily gender typical or gender exclusive, but there's some typical traits that really work with girl versus boy athletes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I appreciate that because again, I'm a man and I think like a man, and my experience has been a man, and therefore trying to put decoding and debugging some of those preferences in software, when I address my daughter, and the thing that I ran into with coaching girls and young women at the gyms, there's just stuff I don't think about because obviously I just don't, because it has been my experience, but I had to figure out, and a big part of it, you talk about trust and communication, because I mean, the world could be solved in a lot of ways about building trust through communication by action of good work. So when you build that and never ever violating that trust and having that absolute integrity and ethos is important because you have to build a space of safety, support, and love, and where everybody can be seen, be heard, and be acknowledged for their concerns. And with that, just like with anything with parenting, with coaching to a point, it's an extension of parenting because you're an adult mentoring a youth. You're somebody who is senior to them in experience, um, mentoring somebody who's inexperienced in that field. So there is like that parent student or parent child student instructor relationship that is built upon the trust of like, hey, you know what you're talking about, and you have my best intentions in mind to set me up for success and safety. So engendering a space of safety and concern is really huge. And again, here's the thing about what's interesting about men. Men, we're great about like saying our piece, but in a lot of cases, a lot of men are not very great communicators because they don't listen. And not just men in general, but I'm speaking as a man and dealing with a lot of male athletes and coaches over the years. Is that men will just say their piece and expect that execute. I said it. Here's the mission set. Here's my intent. Execute. But they don't have that feedback. Now, time, space, and situation may not allow it. But when you're in a training situation where it's a problem solving conversation between a coach and an athlete, they need to be able to trust each other enough to say, hey, I don't get it, coach. Can you help me out? Or I'm afraid that can't do this. Or what are your concerns? And like one of the things that I discovered coaching young women for so many years in boxing and leading to mixed martial arts is this issue about like trust and touch. That like, hey, let's remove the awkwardness of the situation and saying, hey, this is a human body. For one, nobody has the right to touch you without your permission and consent. So establishing that boundary was really important, but also putting the fact that with that frame of mind and boundary with my female male athlete touch consent situation is like, hey, you're touching people because we are doing jujitsu, we're grappling, we're doing Muay Thai, we're doing clinch work, we're doing wrestling. You're going to touch people. So let's establish that basis of trust first, and that expectation of here's the task, execute that task, and here's also the consequences when you violate that task and that space. And fortunately enough, we had built such a culture in the gym that I never had an issue with that with my teenagers. And that was always an interesting one too. It's like dealing with my young men and my young women doing Muay Thai clinch work. And I did it all the time with them wearing hoodies because one, it was practical for Alaska. And two, it helped like build that barrier, that extra barrier of consent and trust. So, and that was an interesting situation. And I never actually had an issue with my male and female athletes being awkward. I mean, they're awkward because like, oh, haha, we're touching each other and we're grappling. But it's like there was never a violation of trust that they expected. Like, hey, if you violate my parameters of consent of touch here, well, coach has said I can elbow you in the face, I can throw you to the ground. There's consequences, but
Yeah.
that's a tribal aspect. But when you're coming new to the sports, new to it, that's a lot to ask.
Yeah.
And so as a female athlete and as a female coach, how do you bridge that gap and talking to a young athlete, saying a young female athlete saying, hey, it's okay. How have you addressed that?
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, that I think about a lot too. And it sounds like as a team, you've gotten to that space. I work with two coaches that actually address this really well. One is Katie Kriebel.
Yeah.
She used to be Katie Downing. She's one of my favorite people in the world. And she used to be a teammate of mine, world bronze medalist, maybe 2-time. Anyway, she's fantastic. Now she's the assistant coach for Team USA national team, right? So Katie has a policy in her room when she coached high school, mixed gender, just in general, that before you engage in wrestling, you do a handshake. It's the handshake rule, right? It's basically like if we're going to jump out and like start wrestling, I'd like handshake and then would start wrestling. Really natural, right? If somebody doesn't shake your hand, you don't touch them, right? So it's teaching these high school kids what consent looks like, what it doesn't look like, right? It also cuts down on a lot of unnecessary injuries where like somebody's just like sitting there like relaxed and somebody just like jumps on them, gives them a shoulder injury that takes them out of the like competition for the rest of the season, right? And so that like it just teaches a really reasonable way to engage in a physical way. Another coach that I work with, her name's Geneva Gray. She has a sister who's named Adeline Gray. She's like kind of a big deal. She's a 6-time world champion wrestler. But Geneva has, when she teaches coaches clinics, she will, she'll like be teaching these different things. She'll bring people up from the audience and she'll like, she'll be like, oh, I'm going to show you on this. Is it okay if I go? Anyway, she like does a whole coaching clinic. And then at the end of the day, she says, did you guys notice how every time I showed a move on somebody, I asked them first? And they're like, oh, wait, yeah, I did notice that. Because a lot of times coaches are either uncomfortable to show moves on children, especially children of who identify as a different gender, right? Or they're like, yeah, that's going to take too much time. I'm trying to get everything I need to do in this wrestling, in this practice time. But it doesn't take a lot of extra time. You just say, hey, is it okay if I show this move here? She like with her athletes, wrestling is a intense sport. So like if an arm is like, like in a place that they don't feel comfortable, she's just like, just move my arm. Like, I'm so sorry about that. Like, like just letting people know that they can advocate for their own physical comfort. There's that communication that becomes natural. And I think that's really valuable. And then a point that you touched on earlier is, when you have mixed co-ed wrestling or sports, it's really important for kids to learn that they can engage physically with another person. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be violent. It's just the game that you're playing. And it's that mutual respect and communication and trust. And I know that like, I grew up wrestling boys and at first it was awkward. Like, it's tricky and it's awkward for some boys to wrestle girls. I didn't have a choice. So I'd wrestle who would ever wrestle me, like whatever. Yeah. But like, that first little bit, it is awkward maybe. But then you forget about it, especially if you're wrestling somebody if you're, competing against somebody who's challenging you, then like the person goes from being somebody of a, different, who like, a girl or goes from being a girl to being a wrestler, and actually to be able to see other people as, not their like one linear what they are. Like, okay, when we're on the mat, we're wrestlers. When we're in, school, we're students. When I have a crush on this person, they're a boy or whatever, like it changes with different roles. And then finally, to address that topic, what you asked about, as you're bringing kids into the sport who maybe have never had that physicality, like for wrestling, we start kind of simple, with games that just kind of get people comfortable, right? That's not like throwing them right into it. Maybe it's shoe tag, right? Where you're like in your stance and you're trying to hit the other person's shoe. And if you get their shoe, then they're out. So like, it's just like moving, getting in position. And then the other one, and that favors like smaller people, faster people, which is always
love that game. Love that game.
And then I also like to play sumo with kids because, sumo, it is physical, right? You're pushing, moving people. I give the kids the option if they don't want to do the game that day, like they don't have to do the game, but it's fun, and like people get into it and it is physical, but it's not super physical. You can kind of keep an arm's distance and play sumo, and then build up your confidence. And then the other thing about that is it favors kids who are bigger. So like you have people from different sizes having a positive experience in the sport of wrestling, at their own pace, but that feels comfortable for them. And I think that is a really key piece in all combat sports or all really intense sports to bringing people in, because, sport is a powerful tool to affect people's lives. But if we're like making like the barrier so high to like be able to get into the sport and feel comfortable, then we're losing all the opportunity for these kids to really come into the room and have a positive experience. So I talked a lot about that. I hope that was.
No, no, that's awesome. There is two parts that come to mind because like with the process of sport, like this is so much, and I think it's actually just a culture beyond sport, but we were so fixated on the product, the win, getting to the competition, doing the thing that we often forget about the process. And it's actually the process that is the most important part about getting to the final product. And the way I've expressed it in the past is that the final product, the sport, the actual event, the fight, the match, whatever, that is a celebration of all that work ahead of time. And but you have to put that work ahead of time to be worthwhile to celebrate all that hard effort. But that part gets forgotten about often as well, like the process of, hey, we went through all of this to build a groundwork of understanding like a culture of trust and safety, getting past our insecurities and building confidence, and just like the process of learning a new skill set and learning about ourselves. And that right there gets lost so much because we're so fixated on the end state, and our identity is predicated often for a lot of athletes is about the result of the end state. And that part is hard and that's sad, when the fact is we should be celebrating from the beginning all the way through. And it's the process that's the thing that's endemic, or that's not endemic, that is that's impressionable for the athlete carrying forward, because we remember the hard practices. Yeah, we remember the wins and losses, but really it's the process of the practice is what we really sticks in our minds. And that's really important for people to like understand. And again, this is that thing about situation and experience. Like if you haven't experienced that, regardless if it's wrestling, combat sports, or whatever, it's just like the beauty of the process of learning and preparing is something that we should celebrate, because in the long run, the window of competition is really small, but we can be learning constantly. We can be practicing constantly, and that part is beautiful. And yeah, that's well put. There was another part in there I had. I don't know, lost. Blame on head injuries and forget. But yeah, so actually no, it's the issue of dealing. So like consent games are really important because it's about mindfulness. It's about being present in mind, because this issue about consent and making it awkward in contact, like if you are too preoccupied with like, oh, I shouldn't touch in this spot, or they're touching me in this spot, and being worried about like, is this okay or not, your mind is split focused from like the intent of like, hey, they're going to smash me on the mat, or they're going to drive an elbow in my face, or they're going to smash me upside the head with a stick if it's FMA. It's like the presence of mind of like, you have to be here now, shut out the world, and focus, hyper focus on the intent of it. Because in wrestling, it's you on the mat with you on the mat and the referee. In MMA and boxing, it's you in the ring with the other fighter and the ref. It's always just like, you have to be here now. And teaching that mindfulness is a big part of like understanding, as I found, with like getting past that awkwardness of like, if you're so focused on the gender issues and the awkwardness, you're not being fully responsible to yourself and accountable to yourself. And also, you're not being responsible to your training partner, because in the team aspect and anything is that you're not trying to beat them in the gym every day. You're trying to support them in their process, and you're being deficient and not helping them be a better athlete when you're not being present and accountable, like saying, hey, do the job, do the thing, be here now. And that bit of mindfulness is really hard for a lot of people and a lot of athletes. And I think if we spend more time, and this sounds more emotionally driven and emotionally charged, and like it's psychology, when the fact of the matter is there's so much sports psychology that isn't talked about, that deals with life outside the mat, off the mat, out of the cage, out of the ring, that our window of competition is so small that we have to like develop those skills to deal with life thereafter. And one of those big things has to be mindfulness, of being presently current in the now, of let's do the task, let's be there. And that, I think that is really important, especially with the life and world that we're at with. We have a little rectangular anxiety device that forces us to be like disconnected and like have a window span of 5 seconds when we should be focused on let's have the present conversation here. Let's be here mindful here and be here now. So I don't know if that's been your
Yeah.
experience.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think that's why one of the reasons why I love the sport so much is because you have to be present. It demands you have like a focused and present mind. You can't be thinking of like, what do I have to do over there? What do I have? Like how does my hair look?
Mhm.
Like, was I mean? Was I too nice earlier? Like, whatever. Like, I love it. I love wrestling now for that exact reason why we can just like be present and wrestle. And then like with that like discomfort on the mat, like some of those things you just kind of work through. And then some of them like they're like if you have two kids and one kid just feels so uncomfortable wrestling, another kid like it's I feel like in the past as an early coach, I'd be like, just get over it. You're going to be fine. Right.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, and then after a little bit more understanding of that I don't always understand everything, right?
Yeah.
Once we
Coaches are human.
the
Coaches are
more we
human.
learn, the less we know.
Yep.
And so I think I'm actually more flexible to the idea of like, okay, like this is somebody who I have a really hard time wrestling with, assuming it's like a reasonable reason. And I would say most times they're reasonable enough reasons. Let's figure out something for you to do because that comfort level in wrestling for the athletes is important, right? And they'll get where they need to be eventually. But if we force it on them, then it's kind of tricky. So like I defer to the athletes a lot of times. And then like as a coach, there's certain things that I'm like, I get in there, I'm like, ooh, this is not a move that I want to show on a young man, right?
Yep.
So I'm gonna show it on a girl, or I'm gonna have one of the other athletes show it on another athlete. And it's just like recognizing that, yeah, sometimes there are these boundaries that are uncomfortable, and sometimes you can just kind of like move through them seamlessly. Sometimes you respect them and you like don't make it you don't have to make it a big deal, but you stay in the area that is that feels respectful and comfortable to you
Mhm.
or to the athlete. And then like as you get more involved in the sport and more bought in, it just becomes a non-issue so often. That's
Yep.
my experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think a lot, and just like with leadership starts and ends and fails at the top. And with the coach, it's on you. You set the tone as to what's expected and what's accepted. And you have to have the integrity to hold the line to also communicate that this is the boundaries which we have established and here's the consequences when you violate that. And it builds again that trust factor between coach and athlete, and that's incredibly important. And yeah, I applaud, and that's the thing about great coaches understand these things and put them into practice, and that's actually the forefront of what they're concerned about. Not so much about the end result of hey, we got the W. They're worried about the long term sustainability of a program, and because the fact is, we remember our coaches. Our coaches have. I mean, it's an interesting uh, external family situation where a coach can be like part of the family in a lot of ways, and you have to build that trust. And we remember our coaches for how good they were, as much as we have coaches that we remember how awful they were, but like for the positive impact a coach has on a young athlete, that comes from trust and celebration of that trust, and that's really important. Um, so with that, have you ever had any experiences as an athlete where you've had that issue of not having a coach that did not meet up to the standard, where you felt unsafe, unsure, and uncertain about them? Because that is dealing with female athletes in a male dominant space, that is something that's ever present as a concern. And especially me as a father, me as formerly as a coach with young women, it is something that I think about, but I can't really fully go there because I just don't know. I just don't know. I don't understand. And so, can you speak on that?
Yeah, 100%. First of all, thank you so much for bringing up this topic because it's such an important topic to discuss, and it's hard, at the same time, but it's so necessary as we put so much trust into our coaches and into our programs as parents, because I'm a mom of 3 kids too. We have to make sure that we're doing it in a way that that trust is landing in a place that it should, right?
Mhm.
So my experience, most of my experiences with coaches in the sport of wrestling has been very positive.
Yep.
That's why I'm still in the sport of wrestling, right? Because I was lucky enough to have coaches that made good choices, who were coaching me for the right reasons, who didn't take advantage of their, of my willingness to like follow and like, eat up everything that they say. They held that as something special, and they treated me well. So I feel very lucky, for my coaches that were very impactful and influential in me. They made a good situation for me. In fact, I had a coach who told me a few years ago, he was like, "Hey, Tela, like in high school, there was the assistant coach was like, hey," I was maybe like 17, and he was like,
Mhm.
and the assistant coach was young. He was maybe 19, maybe 20.
Yeah.
And he asked the head coach, he's like, "I think I'm going to ask Taylor out on a date." And the head
Ah,
coach was like, "Absolutely not. No,
nope.
that's not acceptable." And that was before safe sport, and before there was like really clear expectations of what that looks like and what that doesn't look like. But it can be confusing
Oh yeah.
for an 18, 19-year-old kid who maybe was in school with, one of their athletes. But and that's why you have to have these conversations and educate
Mhm.
everybody, because although I had really good coaches, there was other people in the sport of wrestling, and I would say probably, okay, so like you have to have these conversations, because probably 100% of the girls and women who are in sports, especially these male dominated sports, in activities, are going to have situations where people in power positions,
Mhm.
or within the sport will go past boundaries that should be boundaries, right?
Yep.
The other day I was doing the Silver College, and I wasn't even trying to talk about this topic. I was trying to touch lightly and move on. Um, there was maybe 75% male coaches, 25%, if that, female coaches in the room. And I said, what do you guys think? What, like, to the room? What is the percentage of women and girls who in the sport of wrestling have experienced something that is like harassment, sexual
Mhm.
harassment, to whatever degree, like from the something that's prosecutable, right?
Yep.
Within that, like lightly prosecutable to like straight up put the person in jail forever kind of thing.
Yep.
And the coaches were like, I don't know, 25%, 50%.
That's
And then I asked, no, and then I asked the female coach. So that was the male coaches that said that. And then I
yeah.
asked the female coaches, they're like, 100%, 99%. Like it's everybody. So like
Yep.
as coaches, it's so important to really build these strong expectations of how you relate to your athletes,
Mhm.
because maybe of course you trust yourself, right? And hopefully you trust the coaches that you bring into the room. But do you trust every other coach that athlete is going to experience for the rest of their life?
Yeah.
Like you just can't. It's just like you shouldn't. And so that was really just the experience for women in sports is often a little different than the experience for men,
Yep.
because somebody who treats you so respectfully and like you know might not be treating female athletes that same way. So like I think that this is a big topic. I may have gotten a little
No.
off
No.
there, but
No.
I think that
This is
that's what
great.
you're getting at. Yeah. And so the conversation is important. It's important for parents to pay attention to. It's important for coaches. It's important to have with your athletes. Like, what are your boundaries? What do you accept? What do you not accept? Not because, and then you don't say like, if somebody violates your boundaries, you say like, when somebody tries to cross these boundaries, what are you going to do? How do you have the support?
Mhm.
What are your resources? And I feel like if that is a part of the conversation of our sport, then we're going to build a better world for everybody around us. And it's not just in wrestling. It's not just in combat sports. It's not just in sports. It's just something that we have to deal with in the world. Yeah. So,
I mean, how are you supposed to like trust an institution when the institution is systemically failed across the board, and they keep perpetuating the same cycles? As much as we are trying to produce better athletes with each season, we should also be producing better humans, or helping assist in the process of producing better humans. And part of that is dealing with like the social aspects of saying, hey, 1%, even 0.5% is still unacceptable, because the fact is that it's that 1% is still that one person, that small subgroup that's been now touched for the rest of life and been mistreated, and the long-term scope of how they view the world is, it's indefinite. It expands in its potentiality. So how are we supposed to build a system of trust in an institution if we're not addressing the things that come into conflict with that institution that we're trying to build trust in? And like some of the people go about like that old school mentality about like, well, through adversity you build resiliency, which in two lights can do great things. Like in one, adversity builds resiliency. As a result, it builds competence and confidence, which is true, and that's a very powerful thing. But on the other side of it, at what cost? At what cost did the adversity that we face, the conflict that we face, was so damaging that we just didn't make it? And what I'm finding with a lot of athletes, and like my own writing, my own process, is that some people just don't make it because they themselves couldn't make it. And the other one too is like they didn't have the trust in the system, the institution, and the community around them saying, hey, this adversity, this situation was too much that I could not handle. But I didn't trust enough in those around me to say, hey, I'm dealing with this, help me. Because if it's a team, the buy-in, the social buy-in of a team is that, hey, you got my back because I got your back because I showed up. But when the things actually get hard and I need your back and you don't, I mean, that violates the trust. And that's the issue of like, yeah, toughen up. It's like, well, yes, but sometimes it's too much and we just don't, and the athlete lacks the skill, or the community lacks the skill to address that. And this is where having conversations like this and having programs built around it to help build a better community, to break those cycles of pain, and also like have the positive aspect of how it's supposed to be, of like, yes, adversity builds resiliency, but it doesn't have to come at such a cost of permanent long-term damage to the psyche of an athlete, to their confidence. Because how are we supposed to engender confidence? Yeah, they may have physical and capable abilities in combat sports, but there's an identity attached to that. But that identity is like, well, I'm good at smashing people on the mat, but inside I'm fighting these demons of like, I have to do it because I'm being attacked. I don't trust the situation. I have to prove myself on the mat because I don't trust those around me, because if I let up, they're going to see me weak and vulnerable, and they're going to take advantage of me. And these are things that I have had to think about with my own daughter and with other female athletes, saying, hey, what are these considerations here of like, how am I building trust with them? And how am I building, yes, putting them through physical adversity and intellectual adversity and social adversity, but not at the cost of long-term social, community, personal damage, because it's more about life off the mat than it is on the mat. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think what I hear you saying is that how important it is to have like systemic situations involved in addressing these situations, right? Like it can't just be like an afterthought, or maybe, or we're just going to like put blinders on and just like go about our thing. Like, I mean, it's part of our world. It's, and it has to be part of the equation about how we coach, how we build systems, like how we build clubs, how we build our school programs. So yeah, big fan of look at really addressing the things that are so often uncomfortable or difficult to address. And, of course, we want to give our kids the opportunity to grow and develop through challenge and adversity. But there's things that we don't want to be the challenges and the adversity that they experience, because, the people who make it through that are sometimes the exception, not the standard. And, we got to recognize that and make a change in our culture, in our systems to address that. So I'm on board.
Yeah, because as coaches and even as athletes on the team, we are part of people's lives. We are touching their lives. And are we doing it in such a manner that is positive, supportive, for the long-term benefit, that in the end, that when we're remembered, or that situation is remembered as a positive part of our life that has enriched our lives beyond the mat, beyond the cage, beyond the ring. We have to be mindful of that. And too often it's so egocentric, which leads to another topic that we were talking about earlier, is this egocentric mindset of it's all about me. But when the fact is, when it's a team, it's about us. So you and I were talking about a couple of books that before we went live, about ego is the enemy. And what's the other book that we were talking about again?
Wolfpack.
Can you expand on a couple of those?
Okay, so Ego is the Enemy is a great book. I'm like bad with names. I should know who it's written by. You find that. It just kind of goes into the idea of looking at history, looking at personal experience of the author, about how ego has kind of like broken down his, the process of his life in some ways, and how he's kind of worked through it. How acting from ego got in the way of, for instance, like Napoleon and all of these other famous leaders, and then how the lack of ego, how like moving through that ego piece has really made a difference in in individuals' lives, but also the lives of our country or the people in our country. And then there's this other book called Wolfpack by Abby Wambach. Yeah. Yep. And she's soccer lady, and it's a very like leadership book from a female perspective. And so I read those books right next to each other. Also, I'm not a great reader. I audiobook them. I'm embarrassed about that, but I say it out loud because like maybe other people are embarrassed that they're not big readers, but you can listen to audiobooks like me on road trips and get a lot and get, everything from them too. So I read Ego is the Enemy, and I was like, okay, I get what they're saying. It doesn't feel like it really is landing for me. But then I got more into it, and I was like translating it to work for my brain. I was like, yeah, this works for me. Then I read Wolfpack, and I was like, oh, this book speaks to me so clearly. Talks a lot of, and the difference around that was like ego for me isn't me getting out there and being like, hey guys, I'm so great. Look at me. Like that is not what it looks like on me. But I think what it looks like on me is a little bit of imposter syndrome, is a little bit of perfectionist tendencies, right? Where I'm uncertain of my abilities, or like I defer to other people, right? It looks different, but I think the seeds of it is the same thing. It's looking at yourself from the outside in, and being like, how am I going to be judged? What will people see me as? And then reacting based on how others will see you, rather than more of that intrinsic, how do I want to show up for the world? What do I want to do in the world? Because I believe that it's valuable, because it's, that wholesome value, rather than how will I be seen? And so I thought that was, I'm just exploring that idea right now, because I do a lot of work on coaching education and confidence when it comes to girls and women and imposter syndrome. The idea that people maybe feel like they're imposters, even if they're high achieving, capable people, but they feel like they're not good enough. They're not like they shouldn't be the one who's in that position. That happens with me, with a lot of different people. And, when I am an Olympic wrestler and I'm going into a high school wrestling room and being like, I don't remember how to teach a double leg. I'm like, what? If I have that feeling, what about, the mom who's come into coaching later? What about, the high school wrestler that's coming back in to help is that what they're experiencing too? And is that maybe limiting their ability to get into leadership positions, to engage in the world in a meaningful way and give back, because we feel like we're not good enough to be like putting something out there. And then I think the more of like the typical ego is like, I'm not good enough, but I'm just gonna like put it out there because I want people to know that I am good enough, even though I'm not feeling good enough inside. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting about like the differences between men and women, because this attributes to everything, especially with coaching and athletes. Because like with men, our concerns are to be respected, to be validated, to be appreciated. For women, it's to be seen, be heard, and be protected. So like it's interesting, like even the dichotomy between the balance between ego and imposter syndrome. Like for men, like the bigger issue, like the mission of this podcast is talking about violence, having candid conversations about violence, life, and martial arts. So for men, our currency has been violence. And this is systemic to like the issues about toxic masculinity, identity crisis, ego. That for men, again, dealing with ego, it's the issue of our currency is our violence. And that is predicated, our capability is based upon the violent aspect of our potentiality for violence and our quality at violence. Because with that in mind, that means that, hey, if we're good at what we do, this has the benefit reward of our other aspect that identifies for men's capability, confidence, and driven to our ego. And that is our ability to have partners, having sexual partners specifically. So men are good about the two F's. I'll save the two F's, but we can pretty much figure them out. But and again, with this issue with men is that it's conditional based, and it's really sad that our for a lot of men dealing with ego is our conditional love sets, the way that we are appreciated, the way that we're respected, and the way that we are responded to is based upon our physical capability, and often that is our violent capability, our violent potential, and our currency attached to that. When the fact is, power should be our restraint, even despite all that capability. But there has to be more to our, for men, that is, there has to be more than just our violence. It should be, we can be more about our love. It's because of love, for those who we love and those who we love to protect, is why we are capable in our violence and that potentiality to use it. But that is not intrinsic to who we are. Because as men and with our ego, we have to be more than our violence. We have to be more than what we do, and that's beyond the currency. So we're not so attached to the conditional identity of that, and that's really hard. And this is where having conversations, talking about like that it's okay is important. Because on the other side, where that plays into is the way that we view of how we address our daughters and our wives and female partners and our athletes that are in our sphere of influence, of like saying, hey, as a man, my concerns is about my violent currency, and you, my female athlete, or just female attached to my life, that my responsibility is to protect you, when the fact is it is not my responsibility. Life and personal liberty is based upon the individual to take accountability of it. But for men, it's like it's that coded aspect of we are the protectors, which we should, as everybody should be. But for a lot of men, they have this hyper focus of saying, hey, we're the experts of violence because our currency is violence. So we're going to teach women how to deal with violence because you're dealing with violence attached to like potentiality of violence coming by way of a man. But the problem being is we come at it with a male mindset and a male's concern. And that leads to the bigger question of dealing when we're talking about self defense and personal protection for women. This issue of, from a men's perspective, it's a little skewed and a little off. And what's important is to address what is a female's perspective when it comes to dealing with violence. personal protection and self-defense, and what are their concerns of like how do they want it to be taught. And actually, I'm just going to shut up about it because really this is a topic that is specific for you. What are your concerns? What are your thoughts? And how do you want to address self-defense, protection, and everything?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. When you explain this, like it's a different perspective than I have experienced, and also like because you're a different person. So I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I would say, and like when you I have to say there's like a little gut in me that's like, I don't want to be protected.
Yeah.
But I also have, I also have friends who like have so often like the issue of safety has been the reason why they didn't go travel here or do this.
Hmm.
And I'm like, man, I've never really experienced that.
Yep.
I have to a degree, but like not as prevalent as other people. And part of that is because, knowing what you're capable of and knowing what you're not capable of through combat sports can really buoy that sense of understanding of where you're safe and where you're not.
Hmm.
Also, the reality is that we have in common is that like we've lost people. Like
Yeah.
I've lost a friend, right? Duffy, who
Yeah.
was like murdered, raped
Yeah.
here in Alaska,
Yeah.
like, and that idea of like, oh, this like safety bubble that I just imagined I had isn't
Hmm.
as like cushy as I thought, right?
Yeah.
That extends to my athletes, to myself, to my daughter, to my sons. I mean, to everybody around, and that need for safety um, becomes, becomes more important. But again, like you teach somebody combat sports, and the way they walk into the room will make them a harder target than
Yeah.
somebody who doesn't understand that, right? So that physical part is so important. But the other part that helps me as a female feel more safe is understanding and knowledge,
Hmm.
and having a network and community around me that I know, how to be safe. Because like, safety situations a lot of times are physical, like it is
Yep.
about physical safety, but a lot of times it's more about emotional safety, or like, like there's other pieces, social safety, right? Like those are all situations that our brains treat kind of the same, right? With that fight or flight, right?
Yep.
um, and so I think the added to that is that the community piece is really valuable.
Yeah.
Like, when we're talking about self-defense, like that community piece is really important part of that, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I feel like I will, and the physical part is so important as well, but it's just one of the many pieces. I
Yep.
don't know if I'm really explaining this well, and please jump in with like specific
Oh,
questions.
no, this is great. So, like the things that we talk about stress inoculation and confidence. So, to share a little bit about the motto and like ethos that I try to engender at the gym and the team, and just that I grew up with in concern to our methodology of martial arts. So, our family fighting words are memoir questum voces. In Latin, that simply means remember who you are. Every time I went into the cage, every time I went to the ring, every time that I fought, my father would tell me two things: son, I love you, and remember who you are. That is predicated, however, on knowing who you are. And that part right there is really hard for people to figure out. And still, like almost approaching 40, I'm still trying to figure that out as well. But like building that basis of trust, of understanding, like, hey, you are part of a process, part of a tribe that helps build that confidence. Because the other side of that motto underneath the family banner was this issue about physical confidence, and we summed it up in a family quote of, "I know who I am, for I'm a warrior. I know what I can do. I know what I can do to my enemies. Therefore, I'm at peace, and there is no conflict." Now, that's powerful and painful at the same time. Where it's painful is the fact is that confidence and the idea of an enemy. Because I have an enemy, I have to be physically, emotionally, all prepared to deal with violence to such a point that even to the point of lethality. And spending a life focused on that's a lot to ask somebody. And that's a lot to ask our daughters and our wives and our sisters and our mothers to have that mentality of saying, hey, the confidence that you have to build as an individual, to have that liberty minded self protection, that personal protection, saying, hey, you have to have the confidence to do this stuff and capable enough, and realize that it's not just enough, you're more. That comes at a cost of the physical aspect, the mental aspect, the emotional aspect of you have to put a lot of work in. And when I found, when I was teaching self defense and personal protection here in the community, because I used to teach a monthly 4 hour block, which was not intended as like 4 hour one and done. It was really a lot of like saying, hey, this is an introduction to it, but the work is done every day. This is just, it should be a point of inspiration and conversation. And the things that I found as a male instructor dealing with a lot of the women who came to these courses is that I'm dealing with after the fact. I'm dealing with it after the fact if it happened to them or happened to somebody around them. And then they're coming from a point of fear. I mean, and trying to build resiliency after fear, after a damaging situation. And that's really hard. And that's really hard to carry as a man, telling women, saying, hey, we're trying to teach women, saying, hey, you have to fight men. And knowing that if you have to fight men, that me as a man sharing this knowledge, even though they may be in the mental state of it, still very present in their mind because it happened to them or somebody close to them, that's really hard to carry. And there's, again, the ego in mind for a lot of men is saying, hey, I'm a man, I'm a subject matter expert, I'm big, burly, and done a lot of combat, but they don't think about the other side of it. What does a female need when it comes to personal protection, self-secure, and self-defense? And they don't have that presence of mind to say, hey, step back. And some of them don't. To step back and say, hey, let's think about the victimhood aspect and preparation and the mindset. And that's really hard to teach and really hard to process. And I don't know if we have a simple solution, because if it's simple, everybody would do it. But that is something I think culturally that there's a big shift. And this is where programs like Wrestle Like a Girl and having female athletes who become coaches and successful in the end are really important to show that, hey, it is a generational change and that it can be done. And it doesn't have to be done the hard way every time. So, is that something that you've experienced or can speak
Yeah,
to?
I mean, I'll try to speak to it some.
Yeah,
So, I mean, like, there's so much there, right?
yeah,
I would say that there's a lot of people that are drawn to wrestling, a lot of women who are drawn to wrestling who maybe have had, physical trauma in their past, maybe a lot of
yeah,
people in general who are drawn to combat sports because, you know, it's a way of reclaiming the ownership of, their body, their space, and their power.
yeah,
And it can be a kind of traumatic, it can be a traumatic experience, right?
yeah,
To engage in that. Some people are ready for that and some people are not. And, kind of supporting people to understand where they're at is important, I think, like, just because you can, this might be the solution, it might not be the solution at that time. So recognizing it takes time to heal. There's we work with an organization called Beat the Streets, and they're really good. They work with a lot of refugees. They work mostly in inner city wrestling programs in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and they do a lot of trauma-informed coaching. And I think that trauma is a really big piece of this because it rewires the brain, and and it's such a process to work through that. And I think that as we're just learning to understand what trauma is and how it shows up. And as a coach, we might not even have that skill set. We might not even have that training, but all of a sudden you're like front lines working with somebody's trauma. Right. And as they're going through it in a kind of intense situation. And I think that, and then maybe we have our own traumas, that interact with that as well, our own backgrounds and stories that make it us either more capable or make it harder for us to deal with it, or kind of both at the same time. And
Yeah.
so I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I do think that, exploring that and being present and recognizing that, like what you were saying before, it's not the destination, it's definitely the journey that is the important piece of that. Yeah. And then more of like, maybe like some like harder kind of like more like tangible. I work with a woman who does this, she calls it empowered mindset self-defense, and she talks a lot about situational awareness.
Yep.
Her name's Stacy Mitri, and she's like super cool. She was the first female FBI SWAT team members. And
Yep.
she's very cool. She did an online course, and what I find I've seen her course, I've seen her teach that so many times. I get something more from it each time. And, I grew up in a bubble here in Homer thinking that I was safe just skipping around the world. And, with these past years, that bubble has definitely been popped. And I have had to figure out, how do I engage in the world that's not always going to be a safe place for me? How do I send my kids out into the world and not be like, no, you know what? I'm always going to be there, right there to protect you. Like, how do you trust the world and also keep yourself safe? And I think that we get to practice that when we do sports. We get to practice that when we do, when we engage in the way that you're talking about engaging. And it's not going to be pretty sometimes, and you maybe not even get it right perfectly, but to have those conversations, to recognize when people are in more of that trauma response. It might look like crying, it might look like yelling, it might look like a little bit of an anxiety attack. I worked with a girl a few years ago who had an anxiety attack during a tournament, and it was, and what we did was one of those mindfulness practices of let's take some deep breaths. Tell me 5 things that you can see. Tell me 4 things that you can hear, right? Those things that bring you back into your body. Try to find those tools and be able to utilize them with your athletes is really important. And it's something that I'm still working on as well. And then also bringing in resources. We did a wrestling camp a few years ago, and there were some topics that we wanted to talk about that could have been very heavy. And we were going to have some mental health professionals during those sessions be available. And then they didn't show up, and we didn't open it up. We didn't have that session. Did it need to happen? Yes. Would we have been able to support that session if somebody had some real trauma? And I would say probably there was a lot of opportunity. And so we just didn't have it because it wasn't the right time, and we didn't have that the foundation to support. And I think that, it's that balance between being like, oh, I'm not going to touch this, or I'm going to go deep into it. We have to do it in an intentional way that we make sure that as we're picking the scabs, we're supporting as we go forward with tools, with resources, with education, with outside support. Yeah,
it's definitely more than a 4-hour Saturday afternoon workshop. It's a lifetime process of trying to figure out ourselves and all these things. And that's for coaching. We're more than just teaching the technique. We touch the lives of our athletes, and they touch our lives in return because we spend so much time. And a big subject that I'm constantly approaching and constantly working on my own writing, and I bring it to this podcast, is talking about vicarious traumatization as a coach and compassion fatigue. Because when you get to know people, you get to know them, you get to know their truths, their knowledge, and the weight of the responsibility of having that information. If you, the coach, are not prepared for it, that will be devastating. And in the case of myself, I speak about this all the time. When I was coaching, I was not ready. I had not done the work because I had my own trauma I was processing through, a lifelong trauma. And I thought by externally, by the ego, by displacement, that I could help people process it because I had shared the experiences, but I actually had not done the work. And in the process of doing that, the weight of knowledge crushed me in such a level that, I mean, I had my break in my sobriety, a tremendous break. I had my suicide attempt. I shut down the gym. I mean, there was a whole bunch of things that had got attached to it because I had not done the work to take on the work of others, and that's important. And some people, it crushes them entirely. And I'm very fortunate that it didn't, and I was given the time and space to process through that and still process it and be better educated on it. But part of that is like talking about it. So from an aspect, this is where conversations like this is really important, I find, for the community, is this aspect of, as coaches, addressing that we are not everything underneath the sun. We are human. We don't know all the answers, and that's okay. But as coaches, we need to talk about these hard things like dealing with vicarious trauma of our athletes and dealing with compassion fatigue when we get burnt out by all that knowledge. And that one understanding that it's not ours to carry, even though we are compassionate and we love our athletes, it's not our burden. We can be in supportive, but it's not our responsibility. But we can be in supportive, and understanding those boundaries is really important. And questions I ask other great coaches is knowing that issue, because as every coach knows, it's a prevalent part of being a coach. How do we, or by extension, as another coach, how do you address those issues with dealing with vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, temporarily holding it and then releasing it without it becoming damaging and damning for yourself?
Mhm. I think that's a really important topic to talk about, and I definitely I'm there with you for sure. I when my kids were really young, I uh, worked with the Independent Living Center program, and there were some times that
Yeah.
I would go and I would care and I would try to support, and then I would go home and I just I couldn't do it. Like I did not like I am a caring, loving person, and I
Yeah.
ran out of caring. I'm like gonna not care about these people at my job who are depending on me, or I'm not gonna care about my kids. Like, where is that, right? And
Yeah.
so I found early on that I have a capacity, and if I go beyond that capacity, I'm kind of worthless to the people around me, and it eats up at myself. So I think I dealt with the physical, I had some adrenal things, and
Mm-hmm.
I had and it physically affected me because I just couldn't do that. And I think that maybe a lot of people I didn't maybe have experienced similar things as that. Um, it's my doggies. Um, uh, it's like such an old saying that you have to put your mask on before you help
Yeah.
other people, but it's so true. You have to do that. And it's very important as a coach. You have to have really clear, firm boundaries, right? You can walk with people and let them lean on you. And then you need to go back and support yourself and build your reserves back up so you can go and do it at the next day. But if you don't do that, you can't show up the next day, right?
Yeah.
Um, Really understanding, especially as somebody who's experienced probably a lot of trauma. When you experience a lot of trauma, a lot of times they say that that's actually what makes you an empath, to be able to really feel other people's experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've heard that perhaps it's true, perhaps it's not, but there's a truth to it.
Yeah.
And, and, and again, it can be really triggering to your own experiences. And all of a sudden, you're trying to carry the weight of somebody else, and also all of the weight of your own past experiences are coming up. And I think awareness is really important, but also being very specific, being not only conscious, but um, like adamant to support your own well-being is the only way you actually can make a big difference in the world around you sustainably, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel you. I think that's important. Uh, um, and as I'm getting older, I learn a little bit more about that, of like some of the things I can help carry something for a little bit, but then I need to give it back, because me
Yep.
carrying somebody else's challenges doesn't solve their challenges. It like almost inhibits them developing and going to the next level. But it's scary, especially when um, you're supporting people who like are going through really difficult times. So
Yeah, because
uh,
we love the people who we love, and we love those who are around us that are part of our journey. And we want to share in their successes, and we want to show up for them for their failures. But again, it's still their individual journey, because at the end of all things, our experiences are our own. Even though we share them with other people, the responsibility of those experiences are not up to us by third party. And like talking about the mindfulness about recharging our emotional batteries so we don't succumb to compassion fatigue, so we can have a use a technical term, a larger window of emotional tolerance to deal with those things is really important. And yeah, addressing that as an athlete, just addressing it as a coach is really important. But even further, addressing that as humans, as people in a society where we're constantly dealing with relationships in any regard, however deep or however small, is really important. But and this is where I find that again, addressing trauma and like the information that we've received over the course of the past 20 years, because there's been some significant change in the past 20 years, having open discussions about this and not just talking about it, but actually finding means and methods is really important to help adding tools to the toolbox to make us better, well-rounded human beings on and off the mat. And and this is where podcasts and conversation like this is really important, because I know from generations before, they knew about this stuff, they had thought about it, but they didn't talk about it. And it was very much the toughen up, show up, and if you're going to play rough, toughen up mentality. And that only lasts for so long. And I think we can be more than that. And this is where stuff like this is really important. So, and I'm glad you are part of that system of change, and those around you that are involved with are part of that system of change, so we can be better coaches, better parents, better people for those around us, so we don't have those shortcomings for those who fall in between the cracks. Because I mean, there's a few people that will, but hopefully by means we will help raise the average there of better successes on and off the mat.
yeah,
So
100%. And I just want to really point out that I recognize that it's an even more difficult topic. This topic is even more difficult for the men in the world than it is for the women in the world, because
yeah,
that willingness to be vulnerable and to, you know, uh, to break up, to like stop that. I will just persevere forward.
yeah,
That's more accepted for women than it is for men. And so the fact that you're willing to talk about this, because it's not a like female versus male experience, it's a human experience that we need to like process and develop and grow through these challenging situations, and we have to acknowledge it in order to do that. The fact that you are doing that personally, and then also publicly for the people, for the people that you work with around you, that's really doing good work in the world. So
thank you. I
I
appreciate
just
that.
want to say good job and thank you.
Because
Yeah.
the idea of the wolf pack and the lone wolf is an interesting little dichotomy, because the fact is men have this idea of the lone wolf mentality. The fact is the lone wolf dies alone. The wolf pack is strong, to use that metaphor, and it requires the tribe, the wolf pack, to unite and support of that individual so we can be better in the long run. Because being alone and being isolated, that's a lonely road, and it's leads to so much failure and that interdependence or that singular dependence on self. And that leads again back to ego. But the fact is, we go to a mechanic when we don't know how to fix our truck. We go to the dentist when we need to fix our teeth. It is fair to say we go to the therapist when we don't know how to fix our emotions, how to parent that inner child. and it's becoming socially acceptable. It's just there's still more work to be done there. Because like
Yeah.
talked about like the accountability of these things and the emotional weight, like the accountability that I carry, talking about one of the shared situations that we have in this community, talking about Duffy, is the man that did that heinous crime to her was one of my athletes. He was part of my gym. He was part of some of the programs that were there. That man came to my home often because he was dating one of my staff members. Now I had no idea that he was capable or all these things. Things I had like checked the box of saying like, oh, okay, I'm gonna help him out because he's a fellow veteran. I'm gonna help him out because he came. We're trying to like help him start over because he came at suggestion from people that are part of the gym. He was dating one of my staff members, so like those windows of like acceptance were already there, but I had no idea. And being a quote unquote professional self defense combatives personal protection instructor who is a subject matter expert in these things, apparently I'm not very good because I had no idea. And it wasn't until like you find out afterwards and like, oh shit, this dude was involved with so many people that I was entrusted to with the custody and time and sharing space with. Like, I had no idea. And carrying that hurts because it's like I really wonder as a coach after the fact of like getting lost in the weeds of like what else did I miss? And obviously I missed a lot, and I know I missed a lot because me as a coach was not 100% present at the gym because I was dealing with all my own issues, my own insecurities, my own drama, my own trauma, my own issues with sobriety, all those things I talk about all the time because I had not done the work. And also the fact is I'm still human and I still make mistakes. But carrying that and making that a defining trait is damaging.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging those facts and doing better the next time, that's work. But that comes at the surrendering of the ego. And for a lot of men, acknowledging our faults and surrendering the ego, especially when it's a field that we're supposed to be the experts in, is really hard. And but in the process of acknowledging that and moving on for recovery, I hope that by hearing things like this, other men, other women, just people in general can say that it's okay. We make mistakes, and it's not our responsibility unless it was, but it's okay, and we just move on and move to something better. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I think that your process is really fair,
Yeah.
fair to the situation and fair to yourself. Like, um, I mean, it must have been awful. Like the thing that you fight against was, you know,
Was in my door, was in
within,
my home. Yeah.
yeah, um, and it's and it's so real, but also like you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah.
right? And you can adjust in the future, but you can't go back and change the past. And
Yeah.
you wouldn't have known how to change the past in the past anyhow.
Yeah.
So
I didn't have
yeah.
the tools.
Hmm.
I did not
And
have the tools.
yeah, yeah. Oh, no,
Heavy.
I mean, I feel,
Deep.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like there's a situation where I was coaching a kid who ended up later in his life doing like being pretty violent
Yeah.
situation. And I'm like, wait, now I look back and I see like, oh, there's some signs. There is this, like, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that would have been part of like, I just feel like that sort of responsibility. And of course you can't change what you didn't know and but we can change how we move forward.
Yep.
And like carrying that guilt is not valuable, it's not useful, but carrying that fire um, evolving, that's valuable. That's what we can do, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I
Well, going
think
back,
yeah, I had checked in
going.
with them more often. Like we just can't
Yeah.
do that. We just have to be like, well, how do we show up the next day? And that's, we're such imperfect people. I mean, we're just so imperfect as humans. We just don't know everything. And when we just recognize that we're not going to be perfect, we're not Like we aren't all that our ego tells us that we are, or we're not. Like we just are who we are. Move forward from that.
To use a coaching analogy, we learn from our losses. I mean,
Yes.
I'm going to say it again. We learn from our losses. And that is more true in the situation of how we address things as adults, dealing with other people. Is like we take that loss, we take the knee of like that gut check of, I was wrong. I failed at that situation. That doesn't mean I'm a failure as a human being, but I failed at that situation. So I can either just wallow in my guilt and my failure, or I can learn from it and go on. So again, it's to use a boxing analogy, to use a wrestling analogy, all those analogies. It's not about how hard you get knocked down to the mat or to the ground. It's a matter of when you get up. And even if you still take that loss, it's showing up for the practice, putting in the work, and being driven to do better the next time. But that comes from learning from the loss. And this is where I'm finding my life now, that I am trying to learn from my losses so I can be a better person than I was before. Because if I still stay in the same space, I'm not doing anything, and none of this is of value. And so I have to do more. I have to learn from those losses. But that comes at a lot of work. And that goes back to like self defense and personal protection. A lot of people want the quick fixes. They want the a 4 hour seminar where they're empowered and they get techniques, when they realize that the truth is it's work. You have to put in the daily work, build that mindfulness, that mindset, and have those honest conversations with yourself, even beyond self-defense, but even just like mindfulness and well-being and all these things, that it's work, but the work is worthwhile. Because if it was easy, everybody would do it. And if it
Mhm.
was easy, we wouldn't have these social issues in the first place. And if it was easy and everybody did it and we didn't have these social issues, we wouldn't have the breadth of interesting experiences to draw from and this beautiful tapestry that is the human condition. Because the human condition comes at the behest of a lot of art. No, as a result of a lot of art, but at the behest of a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. And that pain and trauma is powerful, but it can be purposeful. And this is where I feel like coaches like yourself and myself and others that join us in these kind of conversations have taken a lot of that pain and turned it to purpose and made it powerful. And hopefully, the next generation will build up on that power and will be enlightened and released from that history of pain. And that cycle will either stop or something new and beautiful come out of it. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I've been working with a good friend of mine who is, working through some tough stuff, and I'm like,
yeah,
you're working through this, but it's not like you didn't make this challenging situation in your life.
yeah,
You are the one that's experiencing it, but this is like a collective issue
yeah,
that you experience, and it's not easy, right? But as this person heals and works through this experience, she's also doing collective good for um,
yeah,
addressing that issue as well for the
yeah,
collective. So, I mean, I don't know. That's how I see it. Yeah.
yeah, which is great. And yeah, and I really appreciate you coming on here. For one, having the resiliency, the confidence, and the trust that go in these conversations, these spaces with me, and and have the vulnerability to share it with our community in general. And that's leadership, flat out. A coach is a leader, but the coach is the leader because not because they're in charge, it's because they've put the time and effort and done the hard work to show that despite this idea of they're supposed to be infallible, but in fact they're actually very flawed. But they're willing to share their flaws with others, and so they'll in hopes that they'll become better as a result of it. And I want to celebrate you for taking the time to have this conversation with me and to share this with our community. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I've so much for having me on and having, uh, and being so open and authentic and honest with this conversation and learning with me as we go. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And we've been going at this technically for 2 hours, but hour and a half broadcasting. Would you be up to the idea of coming on again in the
Oh
future?
yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, we talk about some other fun topics.
Yeah, like athletes that are coming forward in for the next generation. I would love to have a conversation with one of your other coaches or one of your rising athletes that's saying, "Hey,
Oh yeah.
let's get their perspective. Like, how's the landscape changed for them, having the groundwork laid out by those before them? Or better yet, what are the wants, wishes, and goals, and some of the fears and insecurities that comes in mind with all that?" So
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Kurt. We'll set something up.
awesome. Well, thank you, Taylor. I'm going to drop you down from the screen, do my outro, go ahead and hang out for a little bit in the lobby, and yeah, we'll be right back with Taylor. Or yeah, but yeah, thank you very much. Hang out, and I'll bring you right back up. Thanks, everybody. Well, everybody, what do you think? That was an hour and 35 minutes by the clock. This has been an awesome conversation. We touched on some very hard things for us personally and just socially for the community. If you want more information about that, just do a Google search and you can find out more about Taylor and also more about the situation about Duffy and that terrible thing that happened to our community and to her and her family. I'm not going to speak more on that necessarily here in this space, but if you want to research more of it, do a Google search and we'll process more on it. But again, conversations like this are hard, but they're meaningful and they're impactful, and I hope to share them with you, the audience, and the community at large. And I value these because they are part of my recovery process. But I think also they might be part of yours. And I like being the person that asks the hard questions that often come off as naive and foolish. But there's always that person that is always afraid to ask these things, even though it's in their mind. Because I know my fathers before me had these questions and wrestled by themselves of how to deal with them. And they just didn't trust or didn't have the confidence and didn't have the space to figure out these very intrinsically human situations and scenarios that we all think about. So hopefully this has been helpful, impactful, and yeah. Coming up next, I have another one coming up here probably next week. I will put out the flyer for that here coming up in August. We have some really cool conversations with Guru O'Brien and his guests, and we'll publish the list as it comes out. But thanks for being hanging out with us. Share, subscribe, all the like buttons and whatnot. And yeah, thanks everybody. Have a wonderful day. Go enjoy the sun, and thanks. See ya.